This lecture is somewhat an introductory lecture in the sense that I propose to introduce a few areas in the field literary studies, and of course it will be a descriptive lecture and perhaps less analytical. And time is a problem, so I may not be able to focus more on a particular area. So what I would propose to do is a quick survey of some of the important contemporary areas in literary studies. And I have divided my presentation into two parts. Yeah. The first part is setting the context of the lecture. And secondly, I have somehow included all these areas, a few areas, under 5 themes, only for the sake of convenience, right? The first theme shall be identity, second theme body, third theme memory, and fourth one technology, and fifth one nature, right? So 5 themes, 5 areas, and one more step, that is 5 and one more stage, that is topics. You can find out as many topics as possible under each area, right? So with these words of introduction, let me directly enter the first part. Part 1, the context, setting the context of this lecture. So when we talk about theory, the theme of the national seminar, after theory, right? Theory and after. So I thought it would be better to give a context of different theoretical propositions before directly entering into the areas, right? So for that, I take you to the period of Plato and Aristotle. So theory, when we talk about theory, in the conventional sense, we had the theory of ideas by Plato. We had the theory of catharsis by Aristotle. And theory in the modern sense emerged only in 20th century. So before the advent of, or before the emergence of modern theory as such, we had that old paradigm of what we call liberal humanism. So liberal humanist paradigm, we know some of the important features. This is a quick survey. So reading the text against the context, the historical context, social context, and the timelessness of literature is very important. Then, most importantly, the stable meaning of a text. The stable meaning of a text and the role of author with capital A, right? The most powerful one, right? So these are some of the important features of liberal humanism. But you know, we can find a shift towards theory in 20th century, early 20th century. But perhaps before 20th century, we can find some events, some developments happening in society towards the second half of 19th century, during the Victorian age. We call it Victorian age, or generally 19th century. So towards the second half of 19th century, there were so many important developments, starting with the Great Exhibition of London 1851. Marxism as an ideology was proposed by Marx and Engels. Then the theory of evolution proposed by Charles Darwin through Origin of Species. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis. And another important development was the emergence of linguistics as a discipline. Saussure and his contribution to linguistics. And we know how important was linguistics. We talk about linguistic constructivism and all those things. Okay, so I'm coming to that. So, the development in the field of linguistics, then the advancement of science, the invention of steam engine, followed by camera, photography, and television, and later computer, all those things, right? So all these developments contributed to the emergence of different theoretical, propositions. And post-colonialism, the coming of imperialism, the beginning of imperialism, and subsequently many countries got independence. So post-colonial period, and in 1990s period, we can find the onrush of what we call a globalization, neoliberal period, and we can find the invention of computer and internet revolution, and migration became very important, and we can see the impact of all these developments in the field of literature as well as theories. Okay. So from post-colonialism to post-nationalism, and because of this internet revolution or a digital revolution, we can see the emergence of what we call digital humanities, cyber literature, and all those developments, right? At the same time, we should not forget the fact that there are so many upcoming important social concepts which have been reflected in literature also, and particularly the concern regarding environmental pollution, etc., right? So the context, different contexts behind the emergence of theories as such, right? So that's very important. And thirdly, we talk about the theoretical turn, the emergence of theory as such in the early 20th century. And that famous experiment conducted by I.R. Richards in his class, practical criticism. And later we can see the emergence of new criticism. The old criticism was replaced by new criticism. Then formalism, structuralism, post-structuralism. And I'm sure that in the morning session you would have listened to all these developments, right? So some of the important reasons behind, or some of the important features behind what we call the theoretical turn, which was very clearly listed by Peter Barry in Beginning Theory. You can see some of these developments. The Indiana University Conference on Style, 1958. The Johns Hopkins University International Symposium, where Derrida presented his paper. The publication of Deconstruction and Criticism. Terry Eagleton's Literary Theory and Introduction, a very crucial book on theory. Baudrillard's proposition, the Gulf War never happened. Maccabee affair, Sokal affair, and there are a few more developments listed by Peter Barry. So these are some of the important developments which triggered the emergence of different theories, right? And we can see some of the important features of critical theory, like language constructs reality, linguistic constructivism, which is now challenged by recent developments such as energy humanities and blue humanities. I'll be discussing all those things later. So linguistic constructivism, it is challenged during the post-theory phase. And subjectivity of truth, very important. Then meaning of a text is unstable. We are reminded of that, Derrida's deference, right? Then human nature is a myth. Then ideological commitment or ideology. So when I was talking to Sibisar, so when we come across a text, we try to find out one ideology or another. So the politics of reading text. Then the last one is very important, different theoretical trends connection with philosophy. So we can find a disconnect with philosophy during the post-theory phase. So till post-structuralist phase, we can find the influence of philosophy, especially in the domain post-structuralism, right? And Now, um, so what I'm proposing to do is a quick survey of the theme of the seminar as such. So there's a debate, death of theory debate, which is going on, and two important works came out in 2000 period. One is After Theory and another one Life After Theory, both by Terry Eagleton in the same year, interestingly, right? And there's an argument, there's a strong argument proposed by Terry Eagleton. So theory is one-sided. If you give a feminist reading of a text, so you read a text with one angle, right? So it is explicitly literature and the literary which have been neglected, according to Terry Eagleton. So there is a point in his argument, right? Dismantling of the linguistic constructivism. So critics such as Christopher Norris, so they strongly proposed dismantling of what we call linguistic constructivism of what we call structuralism, post-structuralist phase, right? So a new cultural critique emerged after 9/11, right? Oblique 11, right? So global pessimism, we can see a global pessimism during that period, from that period onwards. So environmental deterioration became a very important concern, thanks to globalization mainly. So environmental deterioration became a very important concern. So Eagleton, specifically in that work, After Theory, he strongly supported what we call moral, religious and ethical issues are important. So when we read a literary text, moral value is important, moral issue is important, religious issue is important, and ethical issue is important. So Eagleton who wrote the first book on, perhaps the first book on theory, literary theory and introduction, and his two works, particularly After Theory, he highlighted what we call the death of theory and maybe a revision of theory as such. Actually that itself is a theory. Death of theory is actually a theory. So we can find, a post-theory phase. So when you think about theory as a whole, theories as a whole, I should use plural. So when we talk about theories as a whole, so we can find the high period of theory, 1960 to 1990, 30 years, that period. It was a high point of theory. But we can find, another debate, another theory, that is post-theory, that notion emerging. And a very important work came out, Chronicle of Higher Education. It was published by North American Academy, and the work came out in 1993, in which there's a reference to the beginning of the age of post-theory. The beginning of the age of post-theory. So a 30-year dominance, that is 1960 to 1990, a 30-year dominance of theory is going to be over. That kind of proposition was proposed by this work. And around that period, Zizek, he talked about a deep crisis within humanities scholarship. So the crisis of humanities scholarship. And he talks about the post-theoretical phase, right? So what we can see is a moving away from the linguistic turn, a shift from linguistic constructivism towards what we call a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary or more importantly, context-oriented or socially relevant readings of literature, right? So an eclectic approach was proposed, and we can find a turn towards history, turn towards society. What use are theories? That's a big question which emerged in the last part of or last decade of 1990s period. Okay, so theory should be socially oriented, or maybe there has to be social commitment on the part of scholars, researchers, that kind of feeling, right? So post theory as a term became a very important term of debate, right? So transdisciplinarity is a very important component of post theory. So connecting literature with the different disciplines, entirely different disciplines, neuroscience, anthropology, sociology, history, etc., etc., and a few more important points about post theory. I shall be very brief. Theory is immersion in the everyday life. So we have to connect theory with everyday life. That kind of attitude got a voice from different quarters. Then important figures, scholars such as Anthony Giddens, he claimed that theory should be connected with the life worlds. Theory has to be connected with the ordinary life worlds, right? And a very important component of post theory is the separation of theory and philosophy. Okay, theory, when we talk about theories, usually we say it will go over the head, that kind of things. Okay, because there are so many philosophical implications, underpinnings in many theories. So disconnection between theory and philosophy, it was one of the important propositions of post theory, right? And another point regarding post theory is the cult of a theorist, the cult of the theorist. It was against, or it is against, post theory is against the cult of the theorist, right? And post theory is return to life. So we bring back theory to life. That kind of a shift became visible towards the end of 1990s, right? And there are mainly three. We can identify mainly three turns. We always talk about turns, theoretical turns, ecological turn, all those turns. But we can notice three broad turns in post theory phase. And those three turns are, the first one, the cultural turn. And we know that cultural studies became one of the important modes of reading literary texts or cultural texts. But we can find a disenchantment with cultural studies emerging towards the end of 1990s. A sign of exhaustion, if I remember correctly, it was Sisek, perhaps, who commented that anyone can do anything. Anyone can conduct a superficial study on anything while applying cultural studies. And he talked about bus tickets. You can write a paper on bus tickets, right? So superficial kind of approach, and we can find signs of exhaustion in cultural studies, and that became visible. And because of the vague generalizations about social and political issues, right? And they lack specificity, right? And the early phase of cultural studies, it was replaced. It won't be an exaggeration if I say replaced. It was revised. It was replaced by what we call new cultural studies. I use the term new cultural studies because there's a book with the title New Cultural Studies, edited by one Gary Hall. Okay, so what is new? What is new in new cultural studies? That's important. Because cultural studies has become more interdisciplinary and eclectic. It has become more interdisciplinary and eclectic, and cultural studies are, cultural studies that approach is closely connected with diverse fields such as disability studies or eco-criticism, right? So this approach, this shift within cultural studies became visible. And the second turn in post theory is historic turn. So historic turn, there's a book titled The Historic Turn in the Human Sciences by one Terence MacDonald. And this book came out in 1996, right? And this MacDonald, he talks about a turn towards history. So literature connected with history, a turn towards history, a progress towards history, that is in the progress across humanities and social sciences, particularly in America. We can find a renewed interest in literary history, and we see new historicism becoming very popular during that period, and of course post-colonial studies. So the complex relationship between text and context became very, very important. So a shift towards history, a turn towards history, and that is historical. So that is historic turn, which is connected with post theory. The third development, we can call it developments or turns. The third development in post theory is the affective turn. And we know that affect is connected with emotions, human emotions. So we can find a turn to affect which has impacted various fields ranging from literary and cultural studies to anthropology and sociology. The role of feelings and emotions in human perception and understanding has occupied philosophers as different as David Hume, Nietzsche, etc. And Eve Sedgwick is a theorist of queer studies also. Sedgwick proposed that, or put forward the limitations of the so-called linguistic turn in dealing with the complexity of emotional life and the social construction of subjectivity. So it's high time that we gave up that linguistic obsession. We should focus more on the emotional side also, the emotional life and the social construction of subjectivity. And obsession with the logical reconstruction of meaning, obsession, I repeat the word, obsession with the logical reconstruction of meaning has prevented criticism from appreciating how cultural and literary events impact our senses and our bodies. How cultural events impact our senses and bodies. So affect, the affective turn is very, very visible, became very, very visible, right? So this is a quick survey or recap of what we see before the emergence of, before the contemporary approaches to theory as such. So we have seen liberal humanism, then the early phase of theory, then the death of theory debate and post theory and its different dimensions, and including the three turns in post theory. Now we come to the proper topic, that is recent trends in literary studies. And I have 6 points to discuss before we begin the themes. The first point, I'm sure that there are research scholars who have already selected their topics. There are students who propose to do research. So what exactly is research? What is literary research? There are so many books on research which give so many definitions. Research is a systematic inquiry, etc., etc. Okay. So discipline is very, very important in research. And my definition of research, which I already gave last month, the same hall, but I repeat. Research is, I would say, it's a flow, F-L-O-W. It should be a flow of ideas. You should not limit yourself. You should not limit your thinking. When you select a topic, you open up, you think out of the box, let ideas flow. So research is, I would say, is a flow of ideas. Apart from being a systematic inquiry, which everyone knows, right? Secondly, the three levels of research. I would say there are three levels of research. The first level is information level, the level of information. I'll just give an example. You copy data from internet and you paste and you submit a project. Just information. You write about a particular author, the biographical details of a particular author, then you list out the different works of a particular author, and this is how unfortunately many degree or perhaps a few at least of PG projects being done in many places. So that is information. There is nothing new. There is nothing nothing original in what you submit. That is information level. That is not research. Look at the second level, interpretation level. That is important. That's a very important, not very important, that's a very important step, second level. Interpretation level. You analyze the text. If you come across, if you're planning to work on the Tempest, a post-colonial study, which is already available. Okay, I'm just giving an example. You analyze a text with the help of a particular theory, if you are interested in theories, and you give a new dimension to that text. That is the interpretation. Your application is there, your originality is there, your analytical skill will be visible through your reading. That is the interpretation level. This is a welcome change. And look at the third step, that is critique, CRIQUE. So critique level is the highest level of research. I'll just give an example. The Mask of Conquest by Gauri Vishwanathan. It was originally her PhD thesis. Think about Edward Said's thesis, not PhD thesis, thesis, Orientalism. His thesis, Orientalism, which created that much impact in post-colonial studies. So you produce a thesis, you produce a project which creates that much impact. That is not only an addition to knowledge, but also a socially relevant, maybe a topic which can generate discussions in academic circles. So that's the third level, critique level. It may not be possible for all to reach the third level, but always be analytical while reading or while analyzing a text. So that these are the three levels of research. At least you should be in the second level, if not in the first level. Right? And the third point is the process of research. There are different processes of research. You identify a topic, you discuss the topic with a supervisor, then you write a synopsis, you appear before the committee, and the committee approves your synopsis, then you officially register for a PhD or an MPhil. Now there is no MPhil course, right? Then you start doing research, you start your coursework, then you proceed with your research, then you start writing the thesis, then you submit the thesis, and before submitting the thesis there is a pre-submission presentation, then synopsis submission, then thesis submission, then open defense. So these are the different phases, process of research. I have something new to tell you. In fact, I am writing a book on research methodology. I would say that you should prepare, my teachers are sitting here, okay. I speak with some embarrassment within me, right. I would say that you should prepare 3 proposals. The first proposal is the proposal which you submit for your doctor committee, which may be 10 times removed from what you submit later, right. So a proposal, first proposal before doctor committee may not be a clear proposal. I propose that you should write a second proposal after your coursework. You can revise your hypothesis if needed. You can revise your methodology if required. So once you write or once you complete a second proposal, then you will get a clear blueprint, a roadmap, how to write a thesis. You can include the chapter divisions after discussing with your supervisor. So second proposal, and of course the third proposal just before submitting the thesis. Then before submitting the thesis, you need to write a third proposal. When you prepare a third proposal, you can cross-check the first two proposals. Okay. So second proposal is important for clarification regarding chapter divisions, right? And the next point is interdisciplinarity. Research has become so interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. And I have done research on campus graffiti. Essentially, may not have direct connection with the literature. And I have done a project on Kapiri Muttappan cult in Fort Kochi. Again, no direct connection with literature. Now I am doing a project on walking, which may not have direct connection, but there are connections. Okay, the romantic poets, they used to walk a lot. They went to France. Wordsworth and Coleridge, they went to France. So walking has a politics. So you have to think in an interdisciplinary way, or you have to think in a transdisciplinary way. So you all know that. Then role of ethics in research. We study ethics, but still we do plagiarism. Okay, it's a question of ethics, whether you should commit or you should take ideas from others, right? So it has become a very important component. That's why UGC has included it as a fourth paper, right? And the last point is applied research. Nowadays, there are so many researchers who take projects which require field work, And Chaitanya, she's my postdoctoral candidate. She did her PhD under another supervisor. While doing her PhD, she has worked on OCD in literature, and she conducted a field study. She interviewed OCD patients, etc., etc. So applied research is very important nowadays, right? That's why we make a connection with society, a direct connection with society, right? So now different areas. I propose a few areas, current areas for doing research. So I have divided into the areas under different themes, which already I told you. 5 themes. So one is identity. So identity has got different dimensions. I shall be very quick. It has got different dimensions: class, caste, race, ethnicity, gender, within gender, other sexualities. Okay, so there are different dimensions of identity. And literature and human rights is one very relevant area, not topic, area of research. There are so many graphic novels discussing, I'm just giving in some examples. There are some graphic novels discussing human rights. The best example is Persepolis by Satrapi. And I am reminded of T.D. Ramakrishnan's novel Sugandhi Anna Andal Devanayagi, in which human rights is a very important ingredient. It talks about civil war in Sri Lanka. And Holocaust literature as a whole talks about human rights. And there is a sub area within human rights, within human rights literature, HR literature, violence studies. And there's a very interesting book edited by Kalpana Kannabiran, the title The Violence Studies, a reader or so, right? So violence has become very important, has become a very important motif in literature, and there are forms such as genocide fiction, etc., etc. And just let me quickly give some topics. Violence in video games, And I'm not very sure about your syllabus, but I think, if I may be right, I think necropolitics is a component in your syllabus. So this human rights, violence studies, and necropolitics by Membe, and all these things are very much important, closely connected. Then Agamben's Homo Sacer and his question of the question of sovereignty, and the discussion of human rights. Trauma is a very important component, witnessing and trauma. So testimonial writings, a very important genre within human rights literature, HR literature. We call it HR literature. Then dissent and protest, a very important component within human rights literature. It generally talks about debased, dehumanized subjectivity. Human rights literature, it talks about human rights violations, the ethical angle. I am reminded of another work in Malayalam, Rachante Ormakuruppugal by T.V. Chiravariya. Right? It debates the question of human rights. So debased, dehumanized subjectivity, right? Then culture of fear. So fear studies is a very interesting area nowadays. I forgot to include that. So the culture of fear, is very important. Then spaces of violence, different spaces, locations of violence. Spaces in the metaphorical sense also. The spaces of panels in graphic novels. How violence is depicted in the panels of graphic novels. That space is also important. Then violence in children's literature, etc., etc. And there is violence in Panchatantra tales also. I'm just giving an example. Okay, you know the story of crocodile, right? So violence in Panchatantra tales, right? The second important area, I repeat area, second area, that is post-colonialism and beyond. We should be very clear that we live in 2023. That means we are in a globalized world. So beyond is very important. We should not always stick to Bill Ashcroft and others. Now the world has changed a lot. Now we are in a post-national phase, in a globalized world. So we have to look beyond post-colonialism, and now we talk about what we call transculturalism. So transcultural studies has become very, very important. Now it's a period of cultural negotiation, not confrontation. Not like your culture is superior, my culture is inferior. No, not center margin conflict or binary. What we require now is cultural negotiation. So transcultural studies. Now world literature is very important. And globalization and literature, we have Suman Gupta's two important studies, globalization and literature, and I forgot the other study. So Suman Gupta wrote extensively on globalization and literature. Then migration studies, movements, mobility of people, mobility of peoples across borders. Now migration studies has become very, very important. Diaspora studies, migration studies. And food is very important. Food in such writings, diaspora writings, which is already common. There is already a book titled Culinary Fiction, right? City in literature, post-colonialism and beyond. Filmic representation of cities, for example, city in films, literature. And in the field of diasporic studies, there are two emerging areas. One is digital diaspora. Now we are in a digital age. So digital diaspora is a very interesting area within diasporic literature, diasporic writings. And another possibility is bringing both diaspora studies and memory studies together. So the role of memory in diasporic literature or diaspora studies. And I am reminded of Khadija Mumtaz's novel Bursa. Not all may be familiar with the novel. It's a very interesting novel, Bursa. The one with the whale, V-E-I-L, Bursa. It talks about the life of a doctor in in the Gulf. Gender is also very important, gender and diaspora. So these are some of the important possibilities. Okay, life writing studies. The third area, is the life writing studies. There are different areas. There are different forms within this broad framework, life writing studies. Diaries, autobiographies, biographies, memoirs, testimonies, etc., including blogs, 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 biopics. So they invariably, life narratives, they invariably focus on what we call, okay, before that let me bring in an interesting dimension. Life narratives, I would prefer to use life narratives. Life narratives focus on identity formation. Everyone knows it focus. A life narrative focuses on identity formation. Life narratives have different dimensions. One is literary dimension, that is autobiographies, biographies, all those areas. It has got a non-literary dimension, that is the material dimension. Now, a very interesting, I don't know whether there are history teachers here, a very interesting area within history, historical studies, that is objects, how objects tell histories. Maybe a material, what we call material history, I think. And life narrative has got a material dimension also, a non-literary dimension. Think about statues. I wrote an article on statues of Renaissance figures in Kerala. So it is going to be published soon. So how my argument is, statues are life narratives. They tell about a particular social context. They tell about the lives of those figures. So they are life texts. I use the term life text. So it has got a material dimension also. Statues, memorials. It has got a oral dimension also. Ballads, they are life narratives. Oral histories, etc. So visual dimension, biopics, right? So life narratives, they focus on identity, individual, national identity. Think about Gandhi's autobiography. Gandhi's autobiography can be read as the biography of modern India. Right? Through Gandhi, the biography of modern India is narrated. Right? Then another important, very interesting aspect of aspect within life writing studies is the aspect of resistance and dissent. There are so many autobiographical graphic novels, biographical graphic novels, and other forms of life narratives in which resistance component is very much there. And now there's a technical term, theoretical term, which is becoming very popular. Not very popular, which is becoming popular, I should say. That is counter narrative. Last year, a book on counter narrative came out. Routledge published a handbook of counter narratives. So counter narrative, life writing studies, then memory studies, all these things can be connected together. Trauma is a very important component in life narratives. Memory studies, memory is a very important component. So you can take as many topics as possible under the heading life writing studies. Right? And I'm glad that I'm writing a book on it. So it will be published soon. It is in the final stage. An introductory book on life narratives. Right. Number 4, gender studies. Always relevant. But I am more concerned about, or I am peculiarly interested in the other sexualities, because I have worked a few projects on transgenders. So if you look at transgender autobiographies, like Revati's Revati's autobiography, The Truth About Me, or Kalki Subramaniam's autobiography. We are not the other, right? So other sexualities, how identities are constructed, some issues which are discussed in such life narratives, like gender dysphoria, gender transformation. Then the aspect of trauma is very important, how gaze is important, and the spatial politics, space is important, how they occupy space. I just completed a project on the domesticity, how transgenders they occupy the domestic space, and what all problems they encounter, right? So gender studies, particularly other sexualities, and different forms are available. One is a collection of graphic narratives which got published after the notorious Delhi incident, Drawing the Line. So Drawing the Line is a collection of graphic narratives based on the issue of gender, right? So gender continues to become very, very important. Number 5, cyber literature. Cyber literature. Again, I'll just give an example. There's a very interesting form. Twitterature, Twitteraturature. Twitterature. Some famous works are available as Twitterature. They are available in tweets, TWWTs. Macbeth is available as Twitterature. So Twitterature, there are so many forms. We can see so many new forms emerging because of this online influence or cyber influence, the growing popularity of digital media. Another important form is flash fiction, FLASH. Flash fiction is another form which is becoming very popular because of this online platform. So this cyber literature, they essentially deal with 2 or 3 important aspects. They talk about hyperlinked subjectivity, network society, hyperlinked subjectivity. So all those digital dawns. Okay. Now the second important theme is body, right? I'll just quickly go through it. Body. One is affect studies. Affect studies. And we know that affect is concerned about emotions. Emotions. So connecting literature with affect. A term in psychology which refers to precognitive, non-linguistic bodily sensation experienced by the body, right? A stimulus and a response. Okay. Literature and art are aesthetic terrains that covers emotions and intimate experiences, right? So the emotional aspects of literary or cultural texts. The second one, fat studies. Fat studies is another emerging area, and it is about fatness. How bodies are how bodies are perceived. How bodies are perceived, especially in their differences. How aesthetic designs are built around, this is important, socially acceptable categories of thinness and beauty. So we know about body shaming. So body shaming is connected with the fat studies. So there are so many socially acceptable categories of thinness and beauty. Okay. So fat body and depravity. So fat body is considered as a depravity. Fat as death, abnormal, loss of human dignity. Okay. And there are some areas or topics within these fat studies which come to my mind. One is health narratives. There are so many narratives on health magazines, for example. Health magazines. wellness and health narratives. Then there are some important thinkers, Cindy Baker, etc., etc. Then another aspect within fat studies, we can connect fat studies with what we call waste studies. There is another area within fat studies, that is waste studies. Waste studies is also called discard studies, D-I-S-C-A-R-D, discard studies. Okay. There is waste canon. Waste canon, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Chaucer's work, then writers including Beckett, etc., etc., William Carlos Williams. I'll just give an example. Most of you know the poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater besides the white chickens, right? Okay. So waste, that red wheelbarrow is now a waste. It has become obsolete. Why? It has got direct connection with industrialization. The reason behind that is industrial revolution. So red wheelbarrow represents agrarian culture. Nobody uses it, right? So the same, we can see so many images in wasteland, for example. Waste studies, and there's an interesting term called literature, L-I-T-T-T-E-R-A-T-U-R-A. I repeat, L-I-T-T-E-R-A-T-U-R-A, literature. So the images of decay, images of something which is a waste, such images appear in many works. So there is cultural waste. At the same time, human beings become waste. There we can connect waste studies with refugee writings. So there are refugee narratives, refugee writings. So refugees, nomads. So they are nowhere people. So they are not necessary for society. They are considered not necessary for society. So they are a depravity. So fat studies, waste studies or discard studies, and all those connections, right? There is another term which is closely connected with the waste studies, that is garbage aesthetics. The aesthetics of garbage. Garbage has an aesthetics. It has got some meanings within it. Maybe an ideology. I'm wary of using the term ideology because, when we discuss theories, we talk about ideology very often, right? Sigmund Bauman is a very important thinker. His work, Wasted Lives, right? Then, literature and sickness. Literature and sickness, medical humanities, health humanities, say. There's a book with the title Literature and Sickness by one David Bevan, B-E-V-A-N, David Bevan. And, after COVID, maybe, can we say after COVID? Okay, anyway, this work has become so popular, and we can see so many researchers doing research in pandemic literature. And one of my friends, he jokingly said, it is spreading like a pandemic. Researchers working on fiction, poems, etc., etc. So medical humanities. So sick bodies, decaying bodies, sick bodies. Then bioethics. I'm just bringing in some ideas quickly. Bioethics, health and wellness, disability. There are disability memoirs, discard studies, graphic medicine. So there are cancer narratives, graphic cancer vadle chiri, for example, best example. Graphic medicine, etc. So health humanities or medical humanities, an interdisciplinary research area to explore the experiences of health and illness, often focusing on subjective, hidden or invisible experience. Okay. Number 4, disability studies connected to body, right? Two dimensions of disability, physical dimension, right? Second dimension, more important, that is social dimension of disability. How society views somebody who is disabled, right? There are so many things to tell, but let me put it very briefly with an example. The famous Malayalam film Agashadooth. I don't know whether the new generation has watched the movie. So Agashadooth, the film, it was released way back in 1993 or so. Some of you would have seen that film. You know, the story, how the film ends. The children, they are adopted by different people, except one who was disabled. What's the name of that person? Roy, I suppose. Roy. There was no one to take Roy because he was disabled. So that's a social attitude towards a disabled person, right? Okay. It's all about the social, stigma, disability studies, and we are offering an elective course in our center on disability studies. Okay. Let me quickly move to the next area, that is surveillance studies. So surveillance studies, I am reminded of that famous novel by E. Santosh Kumar, Antakaranali, which was serialized in Madhurami Weekly. Now it's available as a novel, as a book. So how surveillance, that novel is connected with the Naxalism, right? So how the power center or apparatus surveys human beings, right? So surveillance studies. So how literature becomes a tool to survey even readers, right? So surveillance, biopolitics, then Foucault, Agamben, all the theories are important, and Derrida, of course, right? Memory studies. Memory is the next theme. I cannot give a better example than TV Chiravariy's Orachinte Ormakuruppugal. The Memories of a Father by TV Chiravariyar is about the story of his son, Rajan. So memory studies, two or three important aspects of memory. It's a very promising area of research field which is less explored in the Indian context. So memory studies is flourishing thanks to the Holocaust and other atrocities all over the world, but in the Indian context, it is relatively less explored. I won't say not explored, but less explored. Two or three important aspects. One, memory is connected with identity formation. Memory, it is a narrative construct. Number one, it's a narrative construct. So we talk about the textuality of memory. Memory is textualized orally, or when you can write something about the past. You can visualize memories. Okay, so memory is textualized. It can be literary or non-literary. So statue, which I already told you, statue is a good example of a non-literary or material dimension of memory. So memory has a politics. We try to memorize certain things which we want to remember. So selection is always there, and we omit certain things, knowingly or unknowingly. So that filtering of memories is always there. So literature is essentially a storehouse of memories. Another very good example is, there are so many dimensions of memory studies. There are different types, including tribal memory. I'll just give you the example of C.K. Janu's Njan C.K. Janu autobiography. It is available in English also. So it discusses the story of Paniyar community, Adivasi community, right? So literature is a storehouse of memory. So memory studies and ethnography, And all these things are closely interconnected, right? Um, Memory and witnessing. Memory and witnessing is important. Locations of memory is very important. Locations of memory. Ethnicity and memory. And memory and media. Memory and media. For example, television, televised remembering. And there are three phases of memory studies. There are essentially three phases. One is the early phase, Plato to Enlightenment period. The second, so Plato to not only Enlightenment period, 20th century, early 20th century period. The second phase is post-memory period. And the third phase is the present phase, that is digital memory. So early phase, post-memory phase, again post prefix, post-memory phase and digital memory phase. So we are in the third phase. So memory and new media is very important, very, very important. How YouTube becomes an archive of memories. Different narratives within YouTube and how YouTube becomes an archive. And interestingly, a YouTube reader came out in 2012 or so. Okay. So many studies are available, already available on YouTube. Then, trauma studies. Trauma studies and memory studies. And trauma is nothing but excruciating pain. Not like sitting in a seminar hall. That's not trauma. It's not trauma. Trauma is excruciating pain. So you recollect certain incidents with pain, deep pain. So it's structured, trauma is structured like a language. And when you recollect certain experiences, painful experiences of the past, and obviously there will be gaps within language. There will be some pauses, kithap, sighs. Sighs. You will sigh, then there will be breaks within language in your narrative. So thematically as well as stylistically, trauma has to be analyzed in detail. And Agamben is very important. He talks about the fissures in language in trauma. I remember a student of mine working on, the blocks of blocks of rape victims. Trauma in the blocks of rape victims. One of my PG students, she's working on that area. Okay. So trauma and memory studies, right? So trauma can be seen in graphic novels, in films, in children's narratives. In different forms you can see trauma. Technology is another important. I'll be very quick. Technology, post-humanism. I think there is no need to explain post-humanism in detail. The second important thing is animal studies. I'm sure that you are familiar with this area, animal studies, which is very important. Then it discusses animal rights, some 2 or 3 keywords. Animal rights, animal ethics is important. And it proposes anthropocentric approaches to animals become even more pronounced. Now we talk about post-anthropocentric perspective, right? Donna Haraway introduces the notion responsibility. Response-ability. We have to be responsible to other species also. Responsibility, right? Then auto modernity is very interesting nowadays. Thanks to technology, we are in a period where technology is so important, and it won't be proper if I don't refer to Paul Virilio. Paul Virilio, French philosopher, he's a theorist of speed. He wrote about speed. He's a philosopher of speed. And his marks are important in the field of media studies and film studies. So auto modernity and AI is important. Artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence is useful in study of literature. And now we talk about digimodernism, right? Cyberculture and digital humanities. So cyberculture, I have already discussed that. Body and technology, identity, Digital aesthetics is a very interesting dimension. Digital aesthetics and the act of reading, how we read with the help of tabs or mobile phones. Digital aesthetics and the the act of reading, creation of virtual public sphere. Yes. Technology and speed, Paul Virilio, yes, right. Digital humanities is an interdisciplinary area. There's so much to tell, but one or two important points. One is digital pedagogy, thanks to COVID. This is an area which is very important nowadays, digital pedagogy. And another point regarding DH, that is digital humanities. The theories of digital humanities, feminism is applied, new criticism is applied, new historicism, post-colonial digital humanities, very interesting. And, the last point, the last theme, quickly, nature. Nature is another important theme. Anthropocene. Anthropocene. Then blue humanities. Anthropocene everyone knows. Blue humanities. Blue humanities is a transdisciplinary area. Now it's very popular. Is to raise awareness and increase activism regarding the catastrophic planetary effects of neglecting the challenges our oceans are facing. It is about the challenges our oceans are facing. So blue humanities, also called maritime humanities. Maritime humanities. Plastic pollution, overfishing, acidification, etc. They are very important concerns in blue humanities. And another very important aspect of blue humanities is the notion of slow violence. Slow violence is a notion proposed by Rob Nixon. Why slow violence? Because ecological catastrophes with respect to the ocean are seldom noticed. They are not very conspicuous. We seldom notice the ecological damages we are doing to ocean, right? So blue theory, there is another term, blue theory, which is connected with this blue humanities. Because of shortage of time, I'm skipping so many points, right? Sea writing, sea writing, also called THALASSOGRAPHY. I don't know how to pronounce. Thalassography. Thalassa, THALASSA. Thalassa in Greek means sea. So sea writings, right? And another upcoming area is energy humanities. Energy humanities. This is very interesting in the sense that this is a very important component in many diasporic writings. There's a very famous novel by one Deepak Unnikrishnan. Deepak Unnikrishnan is a second generation Malayali. He wrote a novel, Temporary People. So he discusses the impact of energy. How oil becomes a very important theme in so many diasporic writings. And there are so many technical terms, interesting terms such as petrodiaspora, oil fiction, etc., etc. So energy humanities is all about energy, how energy is applied, how the role of energy is reflected in different narratives, right? So petro-modernity, petro-horror, etc. The last one, perhaps, spatial humanities. Space is constructed, it is produced, it is not taken for granted. So space, power, identity, they are connected. Then space and mobility, important. There are a host of topics regarding space. Descent, space in comics, I already told you, panel spaces. Urban space in fiction. Spatial politics in films. Then tortured spaces, right? Digital yawns and spatial politics. Literary cartography, that's a very interesting term proposed by Robert Talley. Literary cartography, textual space. That's very interesting. Geocriticism, there's a term proposed by Talley. Okay, so spatial configurations and the role of power. Foucault, very interesting or very important thinker in connection with the spatial humanities. Another one is Lefebvre, Henry Lefebvre, who wrote the famous work, The Production of Space. Okay, so what I have been trying to convey all this, throughout maybe one and a half hours is simply this, 2 points. These 5 themes were categorized just for the sake of convenience. They are closely interconnected. Identity is connected with body, then nature, right? Second point is interdisciplinary. So these points, these ideas are interdisciplinary in nature. I'll just sum up with a quick recap of what I have done so far. I started with a brief context, a brief description of the context of theory, starting from liberal humanism to the second phase, maybe the death of theory debate of 1990s. Then I talked about the different social contexts behind the emergence of different theories till the contemporary phase. Then I talked about a few 4 or 5 important elements in theory responsible for theoretical turn. Then I discussed the death of theory debate, then followed by post-theory, some 2 or 3 important dimensions, including the separation, particularly the separation of theory with philosophy, and the separation of the cult, the dismantling of the cult of the theorist, etc., etc. Then I started with the 5 themes, that is identity, body, memory, technology, and nature. Under each theme, I somehow introduced some sub areas under which some topics were also given. So, on the whole, we can see that theory or literary studies have become even more, I would say, transdisciplinary. Right, number one. Second important point, which is a problematic proposition: is theory important or not? That's a point. I would say theory is good if properly used. The problem is not with theory, but the abuse of theory. Okay. So when you do a project or when you work on a particular text, some theoretical guidelines or some theoretical propositions are very important because they give sharpness to your interpretations. Okay. So you have to critique the theories. That could be an ideal way forward. You have, if you make use of a particular theory such as feminism or a psychoanalysis, you have to critique that theory by extending or by challenging the existing theoretical paradigms. See if you can critique theories in your study. Thank you so much.